the maid kisses the millionaire in front of his wife at a luxury hotel. Upon discovering the reason, he fell to his knees and thanked in tears. Sarah Miller's back ached as she pushed her cleaning cart down the gleaming marble hallway of the Grand Plaza Hotel. 5 years of scrubbing toilets and changing sheets had taught her hands to move with mechanical efficiency, but no amount of time could train her body to stop protesting the constant bending and lifting. At 30, she was already developing the hunched posture that marked the hotel's veteran housekeepers. Miller, the sharp voice of Diane, the head of housekeeping, cut through her thoughts. "You're covering for Lucia this week. Presidential suites." Sarah's eyes widened. "The presidential floor. But I've never... Lopez is out with the flu, and we're short-staffed as usual. Just don't touch anything that looks expensive without asking first." Diane thrust a master keycard into Sarah's hand. "And for God's sake, remember they're paying 5 figures a night. Make yourself invisible." Sarah nodded. Clutching the keycard, the presidential suites meant stricter protocols, but also meant larger tips if she did the job well. Extra money that her father's medical bills would quickly absorb. As she waited for the service elevator, Sarah caught her reflection in the polished metal doors. Dark circles underscored her intelligent blue eyes, and her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical bun. Nothing in her appearance hinted at her background. A nursing degree with a specialization in toxicology, 3 published research papers, and a promising future in medical research. All sacrificed when her father, a respected literature professor, had been diagnosed with a rare neurodegenerative disease that left him unable to care for himself. The service elevator arrived with a soft ding, and Sarah pushed her cart inside, pressing the button for the top floor. As she rode up, she thought about the life she had put on hold. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had the knowledge to understand her father's complex treatment plans, but could only afford them by cleaning hotel rooms. The Grand Plaza's modest salary and excellent health insurance had become her lifeline. When the elevator doors opened to the presidential floor, the difference was immediately apparent. The hallway carpet was plush beneath her sensible shoes, the lighting warm and inviting rather than the harsh fluorescence of the lower floors. Even the air smelled different, a subtle fragrance of luxury that seemed to whisper, "You don't belong here." Sarah consulted her assignment sheet. Suite 4501 was occupied by a Mr. Thompson and needed turn-down service at 7 p.m. After he and his wife left for dinner, she glanced at the time, just after 2 p.m. She had other rooms to complete first. Richard Thompson stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the presidential suite, gazing at the Manhattan skyline. At 47, he still maintained the physique of a man 10 years younger, thanks to pre-dawn workouts that had become ritual after losing his first wife to cancer. The grief had nearly destroyed him, but instead, he had channeled it into purpose, directing his pharmaceutical company toward groundbreaking cancer research. "Richard, darling, what do you think?" Ashley's voice drew his attention from the window. His wife of 1 year stood in the doorway to their bedroom, a vision in a red designer dress that accentuated her perfect figure. At 23, Ashley Thompson radiated youth and vitality, her blonde hair cascading in artful waves, her makeup emphasizing her best features while seeming almost non-existent. "Beautiful," he said, meaning it despite the growing unease in his chest. The security reports had been quite clear. She was having an affair, tonight at dinner. He had planned to confront her about it, but now he wondered if he should wait until after their anniversary tomorrow. "Is that new? Just a little something for our dinner with the board tonight." She crossed the room and straightened his already perfect tie. "You know how important first impressions are. They need to see us as the power couple we are." Richard smiled tightly. Power couple. Is that what they were? Or was she just another mistake? A beautiful distraction from his loneliness that he had married too quickly. The security footage of her meeting Dr. Jason Reynolds at a hotel across town suggested the latter. "The car will be here in 20 minutes, he said, checking his watch. A simple Patek Philippe that had been his father's. "Perfect. I just need to make one call." Ashley kissed his cheek, leaving a faint lipstick mark that she immediately wiped away with her thumb. Business never stops, does it? As she walked toward the terrace for privacy, Richard's phone buzzed. It was a text from Steve Wilson, his chief of security for 15 years. Changes to will and trust finalized early. Documents ready for signature day after tomorrow. Also, increased surveillance as requested. Call when alone. Richard deleted the message immediately. After discovering Ashley's infidelity 3 weeks ago, he had quietly begun the process of removing her as his primary beneficiary. He wasn't a vindictive man, but he wouldn't allow the majority of his fortune, earmarked for medical research, to go to a woman who had betrayed him so thoroughly. Outside on the terrace, Ashley lowered her voice into her phone. He suspects nothing. Everything is proceeding as planned for tomorrow night. Sarah finished preparing the Roosevelt suite for a diplomat's arrival later that evening and consulted her schedule again. She had time to begin the preliminary cleaning of the conference room attached to the Thompson suite. The occupants would be out at a dinner meeting, giving her a perfect window to work without disturbing them. As she pushed her cart toward the suite, the head of security, Brian Parker, stepped into her path. He was new. She had heard he replaced Mike Johnson just a month ago. There were rumors that his previous job had been as some kind of private security for wealthy families. "New to this floor?" he asked, his eyes cold despite his smile. "Covering for Lucia Lopez," Sarah explained, showing him her staff ID. He examined it longer than necessary. "The guests in 4501 value their privacy. Stick to your schedule exactly. No lingering, no exceptions." "Of course." Sarah kept her tone deferential. But something about the man raised her internal alarms. His eyes held the practiced indifference of someone who had seen too much and cared too little. Once alone in the conference room adjacent to Suite 4501, Sarah worked with professional efficiency. The Thompsons were at their dinner meeting, giving her at least 2 hours to clean without interruption. As she wiped down the large mahogany table, she noticed a financial magazine with Richard Thompson's face on the cover. Pharma's humanitarian billionaire. The article praised his commitment to donating 60% of his fortune to medical research. Suddenly, Sarah's cart tipped over with a loud crash, cleaning supplies scattering across the floor. As she knelt to gather the fallen items, she realized that the connecting door to the main suite was slightly ajar, something the housekeeping supervisor had specifically warned against when briefing her on the presidential floor protocols. Through the narrow opening, she could see into the suite's living area, where a man and woman stood in close conversation. The woman was stunning, clearly the young Mrs. Thompson from the society pages. The man, however, was definitely not Richard Thompson. The synthesis based on compound Tex 401 is completely undetectable in conventional autopsies, the man was saying, his voice low but excited. "The symptoms are identical to a heart attack." "And you're certain?" Mrs. Thompson asked, her hand resting intimately on his arm. "Absolutely. The anniversary dinner tomorrow night is our only opportunity before he changes the will." Sarah froze, her breath catching. Tex 401. She remembered reading about it in a scientific journal. It was an experimental vasodilator developed by Thompson Pharmaceuticals, with concerning potential for misuse that had been briefly mentioned in the article's ethics section. With her background in toxicology, Sarah immediately understood the horrifying implications. At specific doses, TX401 could induce cardiac collapse virtually indistinguishable from a natural heart attack, especially in someone with a family history of heart problems. A detail she had overheard Richard Thompson casually mention to a waiter when ordering a low-fat menu option yesterday. She was witnessing the planning of a murder. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she remained frozen on the floor, barely breathing. The bottle of glass cleaner in her hand dripped silently onto the carpet as she strained to hear more. "It's elegant, really," the man continued, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone accustomed to explaining complex concepts. "Once mixed with the tannins in red wine, the compound becomes fully activated. After consumption, it takes approximately 45 minutes to begin working. By then, we'll be long gone, having made our excuses about an emergency at the lab." "And what about the timing, Jason?" Mrs. Thompson asked. Sarah could now see the woman's manicured fingers tracing patterns on the man's lapel. "You're sure it will appear natural? That's the beauty of it. The symptoms present exactly like cardiac arrest. Given Richard's family history of heart problems, no one will question it." He lowered his voice. "By the time the medical examiner even gets involved, there won't be any trace of TX401 left in his system. It metabolizes completely within 6 hours." Sarah's mind raced. TX401 was designed as a vasodilator, intended to help patients with vascular constriction. But in her toxicology studies, she'd learned that many medications affecting blood vessels could be lethal at certain doses, causing either massive dilation leading to critical drops in blood pressure, or the opposite, creating dangerous constriction. And we're sure there's no antidote, Mrs. Thompson asked, her voice disturbingly casual. None. That's why we're using TX401 and not the more stable TX403. Once it's in his system, nothing can stop it. Sarah's elbow knocked against the fallen bottle of disinfectant, sending it rolling with a soft plastic sound across the floor. The conversation in the room abruptly stopped. Did you hear something? Jason asked. Sarah scrambled to gather her supplies, heart pounding so loudly she was certain they could hear it through the door. She shoved everything haphazardly into her cart and wheeled it quickly toward the exit. Probably just housekeeping, Mrs. Thompson replied dismissively. They're always hovering around. Nobody ever notices them anyway. Their voices faded as Sarah pulled the conference room door shut behind her. In the safety of the hallway, she leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. What had she just witnessed? A murder plot, orchestrated by the wife of one of the richest men in America and someone named Jason, presumably Doctor. Jason Reynolds, whose name she'd seen in the magazine article as Thompson Pharmaceuticals' research director. She glanced around the empty corridor, suddenly aware of how alone she was. The presidential floor was purposely designed to be secluded, with only one security guard stationed at the elevator bank. If Ashley Thompson realized Sarah had overheard them, would she be in danger too? Back in the employee locker room, Sarah's hands trembled as she changed out of her uniform. What should she do? Go to the police. But what evidence did she have beyond fragments of overheard conversation? Would anyone believe a hotel maid over the wife of Richard Thompson and a respected doctor? Hey, you okay? A gentle voice startled her from her thoughts. It was Miguel, a young security guard who had started working at the hotel around the same time she had. His sincere concern often made him stand out among the more cynical hotel staff. Fine, just tired, Sarah lied, avoiding his eyes. You don't look fine. He leaned against the lockers. Did someone on the upper floors give you trouble? Those rich folks can be real jerks sometimes. Sarah bit her lower lip, considering whether to confide in him. But what if he didn't believe her either? Or worse, what if he went to Brian Parker, the new head of security who seemed too interested in the Thompson suite? Nothing I can't handle, she replied, forcing a smile. Thanks, though. As she gathered her things, Sarah made a decision. Tomorrow morning, she would request a meeting with the hotel's security manager. It was the proper protocol. Report suspicious activity through official channels. Mr. Parker, I really need to speak with you about something I overheard in Suite 4501, Sarah insisted, standing awkwardly in the doorway of the security office. Brian Parker looked up from his computer with barely concealed irritation. Ms. Miller, right, the fill-in housekeeper. Yes, sir. I was cleaning the conference room yesterday when I accidentally overheard a conversation that sounded like... She lowered her voice. A plan to harm Mr. Thompson. Parker's expression shifted from annoyed to coldly attentive. A plan to harm Richard Thompson. That's a serious accusation. I know. That's why I wanted to report it immediately. I heard Mrs. Thompson and a man discussing using something called TX401 to cause symptoms that look like a heart attack during their anniversary dinner. Parker leaned back in his chair, studying her with calculating eyes. And you just happened to overhear this perfectly clear conversation while cleaning. The connecting door was slightly open, Sarah explained, growing uncomfortable under his gaze. I know how it sounds, but do you know how many threats people like the Thompsons receive daily? Parker interrupted. Do you know how many disgruntled employees, competitors, or just plain crazy people would love to see someone like Richard Thompson fall? He stood up, his imposing frame making the office feel suddenly smaller. And now, here you are, a temporary worker on the presidential floor, making wild accusations about his wife. They're not wild accusations, Sarah countered, her voice stronger than she expected. I heard them clearly discussing a compound that could mimic heart attack symptoms. I have a background in toxicology. I know what TX401 is capable of. Parker's eyebrows rose slightly. Toxicology? I thought you were a housekeeper. Sarah realized her mistake too late. She hadn't mentioned her educational background on her hotel application, fearing she'd be considered overqualified. I studied it in college before I started working here. I see. Parker's tone suggested he didn't believe her. Well, Ms. Miller, I appreciate your concern, but the Thompsons have their own security detail, and there's no evidence of any real threat here, just a conversation you may have misinterpreted. But If you're having trouble with your assignments on the presidential floor, I can speak to Diane about returning you to the regular floors, he continued, his voice carrying a subtle threat. Sarah felt cold dread settle in her stomach. She couldn't risk losing this job. Her father's treatments depended on the health insurance it provided. That won't be necessary, she said quietly. Good now, if there's nothing else. He gestured toward the door as Sarah left the security office. A new suspicion formed in her mind. Parker had dismissed her concerns too quickly, with barely any questions about details, and his suggestion that she return to the lower floors felt less like concern for her comfort and more like a warning to stay away from the Thompsons. Walking toward the service elevator, she pulled out her phone and searched for information about Brian Parker. It took only a few minutes to find what she was looking for. A year-old Society page photo showing Brian Parker providing security at a charity gala, standing attentively behind none other than Ashley Thompson's family. Sarah's suspicions crystallized into certainty. Parker wouldn't help her. He might even warn Ashley that someone had overheard their plan. She needed another approach. She waited until her lunch break, then walked several blocks from the hotel to use a public phone. With shaking fingers, she dialed the police. "I'd like to report a potential murder plot," she said when the operator answered, keeping her voice low. "At the Grand Plaza Hotel. I overheard Richard Thompson's wife and another man planning to poison him tomorrow night during their anniversary dinner. Can I get your name, ma'am?" the dispatcher asked. Sarah hesitated, then decided against identifying herself. "I work at the hotel. I can't give my name. I'd lose my job. Please just send someone to investigate. They're planning to use a compound called TX401 that mimics heart attack symptoms tomorrow night. Ma'am, we need more information." But Sarah had already hung up, her heart racing. She'd done what she could through official channels, but something told her it wouldn't be enough. If she wanted to stop what was coming, she might have to take matters into her own hands. Sarah returned to the Grand Plaza with a knot in her stomach. Her anonymous call to the police had left her feeling both relieved and terrified. What if they took her seriously and investigated? What if they didn't? What if they somehow traced the call back to her? The afternoon dragged as she cleaned rooms on the lower floors, her mind constantly returning to what she'd overheard. By 4 o'clock, she'd made a decision. She needed more evidence, something concrete that the police couldn't ignore when her supervisor wasn't looking. Sarah switched her cleaning assignment schedule, trading with another housekeeper to get access to the presidential floor again. It was risky, but she needed to get back to that suite. "You owe me big time," Marta whispered as they exchanged keycards. "Floor 6 has that family with the triplets. Place looks like a hurricane hit it." "I'll cover your weekend shift," Sarah promised, pocketing the presidential floor keycard as she rode the service elevator up. Sarah's nursing training kicked in. Steady breathing, calm assessment, clear action plan. She would check the trash in the Thompson suite. People often discarded incriminating evidence without thinking. The hallway was quiet when she arrived. Most guests out enjoying Manhattan in the late afternoon. She knocked on the suite door, standard protocol, and called out, "Housekeeping," after waiting the required 15 seconds with no response. She used her keycard to enter. The presidential suite was immaculate, already serviced by the morning staff. Sarah pushed her cart in anyway, pretending to do a turn-down service that wasn't scheduled for hours. She moved quickly to the bathroom, where the trash hadn't yet been emptied, carefully using gloved hands. She examined the contents: tissues, cotton pads with makeup remover, a crumpled shopping receipt. Nothing unusual. Then she spotted it, torn fragments of paper with what looked like chemical formulas scribbled on them. She carefully pieced several fragments together, revealing a letterhead watermark from Thompson Pharmaceuticals. Her heart racing, Sarah used her phone to take pictures of the fragments. As she did, she heard the electronic beep of a keycard in the main door. Panic shot through her. She quickly returned the trash to its bin and grabbed fresh towels from her cart, adopting the practiced movements of a housekeeper at work. Ashley Thompson walked in, stopping short when she saw Sarah. "What are you doing here?" "Turndown isn't until 7, she said sharply. Sarah kept her eyes downcast. The way she'd learned made rich people more comfortable, as if looking directly at them was an intrusion. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thompson. There was a mix-up in the schedule. I'll come back later." Ashley studied her with narrowed eyes. "Have we met before?" No, ma'am. I normally work the lower floors, Sarah replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. I'm just covering for someone today. Well, I need privacy now. Come back at the scheduled time. Of course. Mrs. Thompson, Sarah gathered her supplies, painfully aware of Ashley watching her every move. As she pushed her cart toward the door, Ashley's phone rang. Jason, I told you not to call this number. Ashley snapped into the phone, completely ignoring Sarah now. Yes, everything's still on for tomorrow night. Sarah slipped out, her heart pounding. She now had photos of suspicious chemistry notes, and had overheard another incriminating conversation. But would it be enough? Back in the staff area, Sarah examined the photos she'd taken. The chemical formula was partially visible, along with handwritten notes about dosage and timing. One fragment included the words, administration via red wine, and undetectable after 6 hours. She was no longer just suspicious. She was certain. But who would believe her? The police had apparently dismissed her anonymous call. Parker was clearly connected to Ashley's family. She needed someone impartial with authority who would take her seriously. After her shift ended, instead of heading home, Sarah walked to the 27th Precinct Police Station. For 30 minutes, she waited in the lobby, rehearsing what she would say. Finally, a tired-looking detective called her forward. Detective Wilson, he introduced himself, gesturing to a chair beside his cluttered desk. How can I help you? Sarah took a deep breath. My name is Sarah Miller. I work as a housekeeper at the Grand Plaza Hotel, and I believe I've uncovered a plot to murder Richard Thompson tomorrow night. To her relief, Detective Wilson didn't immediately dismiss her. He listened attentively as she explained everything. The overheard conversation, Parker's dismissal of her concerns, and the torn papers she'd found. Do you have those papers? He asked when she finished. Just pictures, Sarah admitted, showing him her phone. I couldn't take the actual pieces without being noticed. The detective studied the photos, frowning. These are pretty fragmentary. I can see why you're concerned, but this isn't much to go on. But combined with what I overheard, which is hearsay, he finished gently. Ms. Miller, I understand your concern, but we can't launch an investigation based on pieces of a conversation you overheard and some torn paper with partial formulas. Do you have any toxicology background to confirm what this TX401 actually does? Sarah hesitated. Revealing her background might raise questions about why she was working as a housekeeper, but a man's life was at stake. I have a nursing degree with a specialization in toxicology. TX401 is an experimental vasodilator that, at high doses, could cause a fatal drop in blood pressure, indistinguishable from cardiac arrest. Detective Wilson's eyebrows rose. Nursing degree, and you're working as a housekeeper. My father has a rare degenerative disease. The hotel job has health insurance that covers his treatments, she explained, hating how defensive she sounded. But that's not important. What matters is that Richard Thompson is in danger. The detective sighed, rubbing his temples. Look, I'll make some calls, see if there's been any chatter about threats to Thompson. But without more concrete evidence, there's not much we can do. These are powerful people with serious legal resources. We can't just accuse Thompson's wife of attempted murder based on what you've provided. Sarah felt her hope deflating. So you're not going to investigate? I didn't say that. I'll look into it, but discreetly. In the meantime, if you find anything more substantial, call me directly. He handed her his card. And, Miss Miller, be careful. If what you're saying is true, these people are dangerous. Sarah left the police station feeling frustrated and increasingly desperate. Detective Wilson had been more receptive than she expected, but she could tell he wouldn't act without more evidence. And tomorrow was the Thompsons' anniversary dinner, their only opportunity, according to what she'd overheard. As she rode the subway home, a new idea formed. If the authorities wouldn't help, perhaps Richard Thompson's own security team would. Wealthy men like him typically traveled with personal protection. If she could identify and approach them directly, bypassing Parker and the hotel security entirely. But how would she even recognize Thompson's security detail? They would blend in. Professional and discreet, Sarah got off at her stop and walked the 3 blocks to her modest apartment building in Queens. Inside, she found her father dozing in his wheelchair by the window, a book open on his lap. The sight of him, once a vibrant, energetic professor, now frail and dependent, strengthened her resolve. 5 years ago, when the symptoms first appeared, the doctors had given him 2 years at most, thanks to an experimental treatment program covered by her hotel insurance. He had defied those odds, but the treatment cost thousands each month, money they simply didn't have without her job at the Grand Plaza. "Dad," she said softly, touching his shoulder. "I'm home." He stirred, recognition slowly dawning in his eyes. "Sarah, how was work?" "It was fine," she lied, helping him from the wheelchair to his bed. As she got him settled, she thought about Richard Thompson, whose pharmaceutical company might actually be developing treatments that could help people like her father. If he died, how many potential cures would die with him? No, she couldn't stand by and let this happen. Tomorrow was the anniversary dinner. She had less than 24 hours to find a way to stop a murder, and if the authorities wouldn't help her, she would have to do it herself. Richard Thompson stood at the window of his office at Thompson Pharmaceuticals' New York branch. Watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled over Manhattan, he'd spent the afternoon touring the facility, reviewing the latest research, but his mind kept drifting back to Ashley and what he would say to her at dinner tomorrow night. His phone buzzed with a message from Steve Wilson. "Surveillance confirmed. 4th meeting this month. Same location. Duration 2 hours, 17 minutes. Richard slipped the phone back into his pocket, a dull pain settling in his chest, even with proof of Ashley's infidelity staring him in the face. Part of him had hoped he was wrong. He'd been so careful after Elizabeth died, guarding his heart for 3 lonely years before allowing Ashley into his life. Now he wondered if he'd mistaken infatuation for love, blinded by her youth and beauty. "Mr. Thompson," his assistant poked her head in. "Your car is ready." "Thank you, Janet." He gathered his coat. "Any messages from Mrs. Thompson?" "She called to confirm your anniversary dinner is still on for tomorrow night at 8. The hotel has arranged everything as requested." Richard nodded, remembering how excited Ashley had been about planning their anniversary. Was that all an act? Or did she genuinely care for him? Despite her betrayal, either way, after tomorrow's dinner, everything would change. Across town, Dr. Jason Reynolds nervously adjusted microscope settings in his private lab at Thompson Pharmaceuticals. The small vial of Tex 401 sat hidden in a secret compartment of his desk drawer. He'd developed the compound as a potential breakthrough vasodilator, but its properties had led him to an unexpected discovery. At precise dosages, it caused symptoms identical to cardiac arrest, while metabolizing quickly enough to evade detection. He hadn't intended to create a perfect murder weapon. But when Ashley had approached him 6 months ago, rekindling their college romance with a passionate intensity he couldn't resist, things had spiraled out of control. Her plan had seemed simple at first: enjoy their affair while maintaining appearances. But when she discovered Richard was planning to donate most of his fortune, leaving her with only a small percentage, everything changed. "It's not greed," she'd insisted during their last meeting. "It's what's fair. I've given up my career, my independence, and now he's going to leave it all to strangers." Jason adjusted his tie, trying to ignore the guilt gnawing at him. He'd loved Ashley since medical school, before she'd transformed herself into the sophisticated socialite who caught Richard Thompson's eye. He still remembered her then. Ashley Blackwood, the ambitious daughter of once wealthy aristocrats who'd lost everything except their name and connections. They'd met at a campus mixer. He, the brilliant scholarship student with dreams of changing medicine. She, using her family's last resources to secure the education that would restore their fortunes. Their relationship had been intense, calculating on her part, adoring on his. When she'd left him after graduation for more advantageous connections, he'd been devastated now. Looking at the vial that would seal Richard Thompson's fate, Jason wondered who he'd become. A murderer, certainly, but also a fool. Dancing to Ashley's tune just as he had in college. His phone vibrated, a text from Ashley. "Everything on schedule for tomorrow, remember? It must look natural." Jason replied with a thumbs-up emoji, his stomach churning. There was no turning back now. Sarah sat cross-legged on her bed, searching for information about Richard Thompson on her laptop. Her father had fallen asleep after dinner, giving her time to research. She'd found several articles about Thompson's philanthropic work following his first wife's death from an aggressive form of cancer. In interview after interview, he spoke passionately about dedicating his company's resources to developing affordable treatments. A recent piece highlighted his pledge to donate 60% of his personal fortune to medical research, billions of dollars that could revolutionize treatment for countless diseases, including, perhaps, her father's. Sarah pulled up another article. This one, a Society page piece about Thompson's whirlwind romance and marriage to Ashley Blackwood. The daughter of a distinguished but financially challenged aristocratic family, they'd met at a charity gala, dated for just 3 months, and married in a private ceremony in the Hamptons. The photo showed Ashley gazing adoringly at her new husband, looking at her perfect features and practiced smile. Sarah felt a chill. How could someone plan to murder the man standing beside her, beaming with genuine happiness? Digging deeper, Sarah found older articles about Ashley from her modeling days. She'd been climbing the social ladder systematically, each relationship advancing her status until the ultimate prize, marriage to Richard Thompson. And then there was Dr. Jason Reynolds, whose name appeared in Thompson Pharmaceuticals' press releases as their brilliant young research director. His appointment had raised eyebrows, given his relative inexperience, but the releases quoted Richard Thompson praising his innovative thinking and fresh approach. Sarah couldn't find any connection between Ashley and Jason in recent news, but a search through archives of their university's newspaper revealed a grainy photo of them together at a campus event 10 years earlier, identified as pre-med students Jason Reynolds and Ashley Blackwood at the annual spring formal. So they had history. History that predated Ashley's marriage to Richard. Was their plan simply to eliminate Richard and inherit his fortune? Or was there more to it? Sarah closed her laptop, mind racing. Tomorrow was the anniversary dinner. According to what she'd overheard, Jason would somehow add Tex 401 to Richard's drink, timing it so the symptoms would appear after they had left. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, it would be too late. She needed to stop them. But how? The police wouldn't act without more evidence. The hotel security chief was compromised. She couldn't approach Richard directly. His staff would never allow a housekeeper near him without appointment. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Schedule change. Need you for service support at Thompson anniversary dinner tomorrow. 8 p.m. Presidential suite. Formal uniform required. Sarah stared at the message in disbelief. By some miracle, she'd just been assigned to the very event where the murder would take place. It was her chance to intervene, but also put her directly in danger. After a moment's hesitation, she texted back, confirmed. Ashley Thompson carefully applied her evening makeup in the suite's oversized bathroom, her movements precise and practiced. Tomorrow night would change everything. She'd planned for this moment since the day she'd discovered Richard's will left her only a small portion of his vast fortune. With the bulk going to medical research foundations, it had been Richard's heart that had first attracted her, his genuine dedication to helping others, so different from the calculated social climbing she'd grown up with. For a brief, surprising moment when they first married, she'd thought perhaps she could be content with him. Wealthy, but not obscenely so. Then she'd discovered the extent of his fortune and his plans to give it away, plans made without consulting her, as if her role as his wife entitled her to nothing but a comfortable lifestyle. She'd reconnected with Jason almost by accident, spotting him at a Thompson Pharmaceuticals function. The spark had reignited instantly, but it was his access to the company's experimental drugs that had presented the perfect solution to her problem. Ashley applied her lipstick, a deep red that Richard particularly liked. One more night of pretense, and then freedom, and billions, would be hers. She and Jason would wait an appropriate mourning period, then quietly begin their life together, rich beyond imagination. A pang of something like guilt hit her as she remembered Richard's kindness after her family had effectively disowned her for marrying an ordinary businessman instead of the European aristocrat they'd selected. Richard had tried to mend those relationships, inviting her coldly formal parents to dinners and events, always gracious. Despite their thinly veiled disdain, Ashley pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't personal. It was survival. She'd been raised to secure her future by any means necessary. Her parents might disdain Richard's new money, but they'd taught her the ruthless pragmatism that now guided her actions. Besides, it was too late for doubts. The plan was in motion. The special anniversary dinner, the rare vintage Cabernet that Richard loved, into which Jason would introduce Tex 401 while playing sommelier, the carefully timed emergency call from the lab that would give them a natural reason to leave before the symptoms began. By this time tomorrow, she would be a grieving widow, sole heiress to the Thompson fortune, unless the maid she'd caught in their suite earlier today had overheard something she shouldn't have. Ashley frowned at her reflection. The woman had seemed nervous, jumpy. Had she been snooping? Ashley made a mental note to speak with Parker about keeping better track of the housekeeping staff. One more day, one more performance. Then she would never have to pretend again. The morning of the Thompsons' anniversary dawned with a pristine blue sky over Manhattan. Sarah had barely slept, her mind cycling through possible scenarios for the evening ahead. She'd considered calling in sick, but quickly dismissed the idea. If she didn't show up, someone else would take her place, and Richard Thompson would still be in danger. Instead, she arrived at the Grand Plaza earlier than required, determined to gather more information before her shift. She found Miguel, the young security guard, monitoring cameras in the security office's antechamber. "Hey, stranger," he greeted her with a warm smile. "You're in early. Wanted to beat the rush for decent coffee," she replied, setting down a cardboard tray with 2 cups. "Brought you one. You're a lifesaver." He accepted the coffee gratefully. "How's your dad doing?" "About the same. The new treatment's helping with the tremors." Sarah leaned against the desk, trying to appear casual. "Busy day ahead. I heard there's some fancy dinner happening on the presidential floor." Miguel nodded. "Thompson anniversary? Big deal, apparently. They're converting the terrace into a private dining space. Chefs doing a custom menu, special wine service, the works." "Sounds romantic," Sarah said. "Who's handling security for that?" "Parker's overseeing it personally. Plus, there's the Thompson security team. Serious guys, ex-military or federal. They're already doing sweeps of the presidential floor." He lowered his voice. "Between us, Parker's being weird about it. Restricted the regular security feed access. Said it's for guest privacy." Sarah's pulse quickened. "So you can't monitor the cameras up there tonight. Only Parker and his deputy can view those feeds." Miguel frowned. "It's unusual protocol, but the Thompsons are high profile. Do you think?" Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Could I maybe see what the terrace setup looks like? I'm on service duty tonight, and I want to make sure I understand the layout." Miguel glanced around, then quietly typed something on his keyboard. "Just for a minute. Don't tell anyone I showed you." The monitor displayed a bird's-eye view of the presidential suite's terrace. Workers were setting up an intimate table for 2, positioning it to showcase the stunning Manhattan skyline. A small service station was being assembled in one corner of the terrace. "That's the service area where you'll be," Miguel said, pointing. "They're keeping staff minimal for privacy. Just one person manning that station. One sommelier for the special wine service, and the executive chef personally overseeing each course." Sarah studied the layout, memorizing every detail. "Where does the sommelier enter from?" "Through the main kitchen, I think. They're bringing up a special vintage that Mr. Thompson requested." "Perfect." Sarah thought, that must be how Jason planned to gain access, posing as the sommelier to personally serve the poisoned wine. "Thanks, Miguel. This helps a lot." She straightened up, preparing to leave. "Hey, Sarah." Miguel's expression turned serious. "Is everything okay? You seem, I don't know, on edge." For a brief moment, Sarah considered telling him everything, but involving Miguel would put him at risk too. "Just nervous about serving the Thompsons," she lied. "Don't want to mess up." By late afternoon, the presidential floor was buzzing with activity. Sarah, now dressed in the hotel's formal service uniform, helped stock the small service station on the terrace with extra napkins, water, and backup table settings. From her position, she had a clear view of both the intimate table and the entrance from the suite. As she worked, she overheard the executive chef talking to his sous chef near the doorway. "Mr. Thompson specifically requested the 82 Chateau Margaux to be served after the main course," he was saying. "Apparently, it's the same vintage they had on their first date. That's when we'll serve the special dessert," the sous chef asked. "Exactly. The timing needs to be perfect, Mrs. Thompson wants the staff to be practically invisible. They'll have a buzzer if they need anything." So that was the plan, Sarah realized. The poisoned wine would be served with dessert. After the main course, Jason would somehow substitute himself for the sommelier, serve the wine, and then he and Ashley would leave before the symptoms began. As she finished preparing the service station, Sarah noticed a stocky man in a well-tailored suit examining the terrace doorways. Something about his alert posture and the subtle earpiece he wore screamed, "Security professional." This must be part of Thompson's personal security team, she thought, if she could somehow alert him to the danger. Her planning was interrupted by Diane's sharp voice. "Miller, stop daydreaming. The Thompsons will be arriving for cocktails in 2 hours. I need you downstairs helping with final preparations." At 7:30 p.m., Richard Thompson emerged from the bedroom in a perfectly tailored tuxedo despite the turmoil in his heart. He was determined to maintain appearances until he had privately confronted Ashley with what he knew. "You look handsome," Ashley said, appearing in the doorway in a stunning silver evening gown that complemented her fair complexion. Her hair was elegantly styled, diamond earrings catching the light as she moved toward him. "And you're breathtaking," he replied honestly. Even knowing her betrayal, he couldn't deny her beauty. She reached up to straighten his bow tie. "Happy anniversary, darling. 1 year already. Can you believe it?" Richard caught her hand and kissed it gently. "It's certainly been eventful. I've arranged something special for tonight," she said. "Dinner on the terrace, just the two of us under the stars. I wanted tonight to be perfect." Perfect for what? Richard wondered silently. The confrontation he planned, or something else entirely. His phone buzzed. Richard checked it discreetly. Another message from Steve Wilson. All security measures in place. Changes to will officially filed this afternoon. Meeting with lawyers confirmed for 10 a.m. tomorrow. "Work again?" Ashley asked, a hint of annoyance in her voice. "You promised. No business tonight." "Not work. Just confirming our brunch reservation for tomorrow," he lied smoothly, tucking the phone away. "Shall we?" As he offered her his arm, Richard felt an unexpected pang of sadness. He'd genuinely hoped this marriage would bring him the companionship he'd missed since Elizabeth died. Instead, it had brought him face to face with the worst kind of betrayal. Tonight would be difficult but necessary. And tomorrow, he would begin rebuilding his life. Alone once more, but wiser. Downstairs in the staff staging area, Sarah stood rigidly as Diane conducted a final inspection of the service team. Her heart was pounding so hard she feared others might hear it. "Remember, this is one of our most important clients," Diane was saying. "Absolute discretion is required. You are to be invisible unless specifically called upon." As the staff dispersed to their positions, Sarah caught sight of a man she recognized from Thompson Pharmaceuticals' website photos. Dr. Jason Reynolds, dressed in the formal attire of the hotel's sommelier staff. Complete with a perfectly replicated name tag, he was speaking quietly with Brian Parker in a corner, their heads bent close together. So Parker was involved too, Sarah realized with growing alarm. Her options for intervention were narrowing by the minute. "Miller," Diane's voice snapped her back to attention. "You're stationed at the service alcove. Do not enter the terrace unless summoned. Maintain the supply station and monitor for any signals from the dining area. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, her mind racing to formulate a plan as she took her position in the small service alcove adjacent to the terrace. Sarah could see the Thompsons already seated at their table, champagne flutes in hand. Richard was smiling politely as Ashley spoke animatedly about something, gesturing with elegant hands. In less than an hour, according to the service schedule she'd memorized, Jason would appear with the special wine. And shortly after that, if she didn't find a way to intervene, Richard Thompson would be dead. Sarah touched the pocket of her uniform, feeling the reassuring outline of Detective Wilson's card. She had considered calling him one final time, but what could he do without evidence? By the time he mobilized any response, it would be too late. No, she was the only one positioned to stop this. Somehow, she had to prevent Richard from drinking that wine, even if it meant risking everything she had worked so hard to maintain. From her position at the service alcove, Sarah watched the anniversary dinner progress with excruciating slowness. The first course, a delicate scallop crudo, had been served and cleared. The main course of aged filet mignon would soon follow. Through the glass doors, she could see Richard and Ashley engaged in what appeared to be pleasant conversation, though she noticed Richard's smile rarely reached his eyes. Everything running smoothly. A voice startled her. Brian Parker stood directly behind her, his presence menacing despite his professional demeanor. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, keeping her eyes focused on restocking napkins. "No requests from the guests yet?" Parker lingered, watching her work. "You seem nervous." "Miller, Just want everything to be perfect, she said, willing her hands not to tremble. It's not every day we serve someone like Mr. Thompson. Indeed. His gaze remained fixed on her for an uncomfortable moment. Remember your place. You're here to serve, not to be noticed. After he left, Sarah exhaled slowly. Parker was clearly keeping an eye on her. Had Ashley mentioned her suspicions after finding Sarah in their suite yesterday? The terrace doors opened, and the executive chef entered with 2 servers carrying the main course. Sarah caught fragments of conversation as they served. "And looking forward to trying the Cabernet," Richard was saying. "It's been years since I've had that particular vintage. I made sure they located a bottle from the exact year we had on our first date," Ashley replied, reaching for his hand across the table. "Only the best for tonight." The doors closed, leaving Sarah alone with her churning thoughts. The wine would be served soon. She needed to act. But how? If she approached the table directly, Parker would intervene before she could warn Richard. If she triggered a fire alarm, hotel security would investigate first, potentially giving Jason time to complete his plan in the confusion. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft ping from the service request system. Ashley had pressed the call button. Sarah hesitated, then pressed the response button to acknowledge. "Mrs. Thompson has requested fresh ice water and an additional napkin." The dining coordinator's voice came through her earpiece. "Deliver immediately, and then withdraw." This was her chance. Sarah quickly prepared a silver tray with a crystal water pitcher and linen napkins. As she moved toward the terrace doors, she formulated a desperate plan. She would accidentally spill water on Richard, creating a distraction that might give her a moment to whisper a warning. Before she could reach the doors, they opened again. The executive chef emerged, followed by his team clearing the main course plates. Behind them came Jason Reynolds, dressed impeccably in sommelier attire and carrying a wooden presentation box containing the special wine. "I'll take that water," the chef said, intercepting Sarah. Mrs. Thompson changed her mind. She wants to proceed directly to the wine service. Sarah watched helplessly as Jason moved onto the terrace, closing the doors behind him. Through the glass, she saw him approach the table with practiced deference, presenting the box to Richard with a flourish. "The 1982 Chateau Margaux, sir," she could see Jason saying. "A remarkable vintage." Richard nodded appreciatively as Jason displayed the bottle, explaining its provenance with the expertise of a true sommelier. Ashley watched with a small, satisfied smile playing at her lips. Sarah's mind raced. She had seconds, not minutes, to intervene. Looking around frantically, her gaze fell on the small service panel near her station. The environmental controls for the terrace, including the overhead heaters and the exterior lights illuminating the New York skyline. In that moment, she made her decision. Reaching for the panel, she simultaneously killed the terrace lights and cranked the overhead heaters to maximum. Through the glass doors, she saw momentary confusion as the terrace plunged into relative darkness. The city lights beyond suddenly more dramatic without the competing terrace illumination. Jason had just begun to uncork the wine, and the distraction caused him to pause. "What happened to the lights?" She heard Ashley's irritated voice. A server rushed past Sarah to the control panel. "Just a minor glitch, Mrs. Thompson," he called. "We'll have it fixed immediately." But the brief distraction wasn't enough. Sarah watched in growing desperation as Jason recovered his composure and proceeded to open the wine. Richard seemed unconcerned by the lighting change, commenting that the view was actually more spectacular this way. Sarah needed something more dramatic as the server reset the lighting controls. She glanced down at her service tray, an idea forming with deliberate care. She lifted the heavy crystal water pitcher and allowed it to slip from her fingers just outside the terrace doors. The crash was spectacular, crystal shattering across the marble floor, water spraying in all directions. Several staff members rushed toward the commotion, and even Richard and Ashley turned to look. "I'm so sorry," Sarah exclaimed, dropping to her knees to gather the larger shards. It slipped. The tray was unbalanced. Through the open doors, she caught Jason's eye. For an instant, their gazes locked, and Sarah saw a flicker of recognition in his expression. Not that he knew her, but that he sensed she knew him. His hands tightened almost imperceptibly around the wine bottle. "Clean that up immediately," Parker snapped, appearing beside her. "And then report to Diane downstairs. You're relieved of duty." "Yes." "Sir, I'm so sorry," Sarah repeated, deliberately taking her time to clean up. trying to maintain sight lines to the table where Jason had resumed his wine service. The cork came out with a soft pop. Jason presented it to Richard, who examined it with the appreciation of a connoisseur before nodding his approval. Jason then poured a small amount into Richard's glass for tasting. Sarah felt panic rising in her throat. Within seconds, Richard would taste the wine. Once he approved it, full glasses would be poured, and the countdown to his death would begin, as Parker physically steered her toward the service elevator. Sarah spotted something that made her freeze. The stocky security man she had noticed earlier, clearly part of Thompson's personal team, was watching the proceedings from a discreet position near the suite entrance. He was speaking quietly into what appeared to be a communication device on his wrist. "Move!" Parker ordered, his grip tightening on her arm. "I need to speak with Mr. Thompson's security," Sarah said suddenly, loudly enough that several people turned to look. "It's about his safety." Parker's face darkened. "That's enough, Miller. You're fired. Security will escort you from the building, from the terrace." She heard Richard's voice. "Excellent. A magnificent vintage." Time had run out. In desperation, Sarah twisted away from Parker and shouted toward the terrace. "Mr. Thompson, don't drink the wine. They're trying to poison you." Chaos erupted. Parker lunged for her, clamping a hand over her mouth and dragging her backward. Ashley rose from her seat, her face a mask of outrage. Richard remained seated, wine glass arrested halfway to his lips, his expression one of stunned confusion. Jason, however, reacted most tellingly, dropping the bottle, which shattered on the terrace floor, red wine spreading like blood across the stone. "Get her out of here," Ashley demanded, her voice shrill with barely contained panic. But Richard had set down his glass, untasted. His security man moved swiftly to his side, speaking urgently into his ear. To everyone's surprise, Richard raised his hand, silencing the commotion. "Wait," he said, his authoritative voice cutting through the chaos. He turned to Sarah, still restrained by Parker. "What did you say about poison?" Before Sarah could answer, Ashley intervened. "Richard, she's clearly disturbed, probably looking for attention or trying to extort money." "The wine," Sarah gasped, as Parker's grip loosened slightly. "It contains TX401 from your company's lab. It will cause heart attack symptoms. They timed it so they'd be gone before you showed symptoms." A heavy silence fell over the terrace. Richard's expression remained unreadable as he looked from Sarah to his wife and then to Jason, who had gone deathly pale. That's absurd," Jason stammered. "This woman is clearly delusional." Richard turned to his security man. "Steve, secure that glass. No one touches it." Steve Wilson nodded, carefully placing Richard's wine glass into a clear evidence bag he produced from his jacket pocket. "Richard, you can't possibly believe this. This made over me," Ashley said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what to believe yet," Richard replied calmly, "but I do know that TX401 is a highly restricted compound from our experimental laboratory. The fact that this young woman knows about it at all is concerning." He turned back to Sarah, his gaze intense but not unkind. "Who are you, and how do you know about TX401? Parker's grip on Sarah tightened painfully as the room fell into a tense silence. Everyone's eyes were fixed on her, some curious, others hostile. Richard Thompson's penetrating and assessing. "My name is Sarah Miller," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I work as a housekeeper here, but I have a nursing degree with a specialization in toxicology. 2 days ago, I overheard Mrs. Thompson and Dr. Reynolds discussing how they would use TX401 to poison you during your anniversary dinner." "That's preposterous," Ashley exclaimed, her face flushing. "Richard, you can't possibly believe—" "Let her speak," Richard said quietly. Raising his hand again, his face remained composed, but Sarah noticed his security man, Steve, had moved to block the terrace exit, effectively trapping everyone in place. "I was cleaning the conference room adjacent to your suite," Sarah continued, wincing as Parker's fingers dug into her arm. "The connecting door was ajar. I heard them discussing how TX401 would cause symptoms identical to a heart attack, especially given your family history of cardiac issues. They said it would be undetectable in an autopsy, and that tonight was their only chance before you changed your will. A flash of something, surprise, perhaps, crossed Richard's features before he masked it again. "This is outrageous," Jason said, but his voice trembled slightly. "Mr. Thompson, I've served your company faithfully for years. This woman is clearly unstable. If I'm unstable, why did you drop the wine bottle when I shouted? Sarah challenged. And why has Mrs. Thompson's face gone white? Test the wine. Mr. Thompson, what do you have to lose? Enough. Ashley's composure cracked. Richard, are you really going to listen to a maid over your own wife? This is obviously some pathetic attempt at extortion. Richard studied Ashley for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Steve. Call the lab. Have them send a portable testing kit immediately. Already done, sir, Steve replied, never taking his eyes off Jason. Should be here in 15 minutes. I've also alerted the rest of the security team. They're securing the exits. This is ridiculous, Ashley said, her voice rising. I'm not staying here to be insulted by the help. She grabbed her clutch purse and started toward the door, but Steve shifted to block her path. I'm afraid I need everyone to remain until we've sorted this out, Mrs. Thompson, he said firmly. Ashley's eyes widened. You're detaining me, or on our anniversary, based on the ravings of a housekeeper. Not detaining, Richard corrected calmly. Just seeking clarity. If Miss Miller is mistaken, we'll offer our sincere apologies and compensate her for any distress. If she's not. He let the sentence hang unfinished in the air. Parker finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. Mr. Thompson, as head of security for the Grand Plaza, I must object to this treatment of our guests. Mrs. Thompson is right. This woman has been acting strangely for days. Just yesterday, she was caught snooping in your suite when she shouldn't have been there. Sarah felt a chill run through her. I was there on assignment, and you know perfectly well I reported my concerns to you, Mr. Parker. You dismissed them and threatened my job. Richard's eyebrows rose. Is this true? Of course not, Parker scoffed. She's making things up as she goes. Actually, a new voice joined the conversation. She did report it. Everyone turned to see Miguel standing in the doorway, his young face determined despite his obvious nervousness. You're out of your jurisdiction, Vega, Parker snapped. Return to your post immediately. Miguel stood his ground. I overheard Miss Miller report her concerns to you yesterday morning. Sir, you told her she was inventing stories and threatened to have her reassigned. A tense silence fell over the terrace. Richard turned back to Sarah, his gaze more focused now. Miss Miller, you said you have a background in toxicology. Yes, I completed my nursing degree with a specialization in toxicology at Columbia. I was working toward an advanced degree when my father became ill. I took this job because of the health insurance it provides. And how exactly do you know about TX-401? Jason interjected, his scientist's curiosity seemingly overcoming his caution. It's an experimental compound not published in any journals yet. Sarah took a deep breath. There was a preliminary paper published in the Journal of Experimental Pharmacology 3 months ago. It didn't name the compound specifically, but described a novel vasodilator being developed by Thompson Pharmaceuticals with some ethically concerning properties if misused. When I heard you mention TX-401 and describe its effects, I made the connection. Richard nodded slowly, impressed despite the circumstances. Very few people would have pieced that together. Richard, Ashley said, her voice suddenly soft and wounded. You can't seriously believe I would try to harm you. Everything I've done has been for us, for our future together. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Richard's face. Sarah could see the conflict in his eyes, the logical evidence versus the emotional pull of wanting to trust someone he had chosen to love. The moment was broken by the arrival of 2 men in suits, carrying what looked like a portable laboratory case. Perfect timing, Steve said, taking the case from them. Thank you, gentlemen. Secure the perimeter, please. With practiced efficiency, Steve opened the case and removed several items, including what appeared to be testing equipment. He carefully extracted a sample from the wine in Richard's glass, as well as from the puddle on the floor where Jason had dropped the bottle. This will take a few minutes, he explained, working with the precision of someone with laboratory experience. The test is specifically calibrated for compounds in the TX-400 series, among others. While they waited, an uncomfortable silence settled over the terrace. Ashley remained close to Jason, though trying to appear as if they were merely standing near each other by coincidence. Parker had finally released Sarah's arm, but remained directly behind her, a physical reminder of her vulnerable position. Miss Miller, Richard said suddenly, regardless of what happens next, I want to thank you for your courage. Not many people would risk their livelihood on a suspicion, especially when the stakes were so high. I couldn't just stand by, Sarah replied simply. Not when someone's life was in danger. Sir? Steve interrupted, his voice tight. The preliminary test is positive for TX401. The revelation hit the terrace like a thunderclap. Richard's face hardened as he turned to Ashley and Jason. Is this true? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Jason broke first. It was her idea, he blurted, backing away from Ashley. All of it. She approached me months ago, said you were changing your will, cutting her out. You sniveling coward, Ashley hissed, her beautiful features contorting with rage. You were just as involved as I was. Enough. Richard's voice cut through their accusations. Steve, call the police. As Steve made the call, Ashley's demeanor changed instantly. Tears filled her eyes as she moved toward Richard. Darling, please. It's all a misunderstanding. Jason was conducting unauthorized experiments. I suspected something was wrong, which is why I was asking him those questions the maid overheard. I was trying to protect you. Richard stepped back, his expression cold. Stop, Ashley. It's over. You don't understand, she continued desperately. Everything I've done was for us. You were going to throw away our future on strangers who don't care about you. You mean I was going to donate my money to medical research instead of keeping it for you to spend? Richard corrected, his voice calm but laced with pain. Was that really worth trying to kill me? Before Ashley could respond. The sound of police sirens became audible in the distance. Her beautiful face transformed, fury replacing desperation. This isn't over, she spat, suddenly lunging toward her purse on the table. Gun! Steve shouted, drawing his own weapon with remarkable speed. But Ashley wasn't reaching for a gun. Instead, she grabbed a small vial from her purse and moved toward Richard with frightening determination. Sarah reacted instinctively, diving forward to intercept her. The two women collided, tumbling to the ground. The vial flew from Ashley's hand, shattering against the stone floor. Don't touch that, Sarah warned everyone, quickly pulling herself away from the broken glass. If that's pure Tex 401, skin contact could be dangerous. Steve immediately backed everyone away from the spill, while Jason stared at the shattered vial in horror. You brought the pure compound, he whispered to Ashley. That wasn't part of the plan. Insurance, Ashley replied coldly, not bothering to lower her voice. In case you failed like you just did. The police arrived moments later, bursting onto the terrace with weapons drawn. The scene they found must have been bewildering. A broken anniversary dinner, a spilled wine bottle, a shattered vial cordoned off, and a group of well-dressed people standing in tableau, tension radiating from them like heat. As the officers began securing the scene, Richard made his way to Sarah, who was giving a preliminary statement to one of the detectives. Miss Miller, he said quietly, I believe I owe you my life. The Grand Plaza's elegant presidential suite had transformed into a crime scene. Police officers moved methodically through the space, collecting evidence and taking statements. In the sitting room adjacent to the terrace, Sarah sat on a plush sofa, a blanket around her shoulders despite the room's comfortable temperature. Shock, the paramedic had explained when he draped it over her. Detective Wilson, the same detective she'd spoken to earlier, sat across from her, his expression a mixture of contrition and admiration. So you tried to tell me yesterday, he said, finishing his notes. I wish I'd listened more carefully. You had no reason to believe me, Sarah replied, her adrenaline finally fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. I barely had any evidence. Still, he said, closing his notebook, good instincts. You'd make a hell of a detective. Sarah smiled weakly. I think I'll stick to medicine if I still have a job tomorrow. Oh, I wouldn't worry about that, Detective Wilson said, glancing toward the doorway where Richard Thompson stood in conversation with his security chief. Something tells me Mr. Thompson won't let you suffer for saving his life. Across the room, Richard concluded his discussion with Steve and approached Sarah. Despite the chaos of the evening, he maintained a composed demeanor, though the strain showed in the tight lines around his eyes. Miss Miller, he said, taking the seat Detective Wilson vacated. The officers tell me they'll need us both to come to the station tomorrow to give formal statements, but they have enough to hold Ashley and Dr. Reynolds tonight. Sarah nodded. Sarah, suddenly self-conscious in her hotel uniform. sitting across from a billionaire whose life she had just saved. What happens now? Justice, I hope, Richard replied, his expression grave. The evidence seems fairly damning. The broken vial contained pure Tex 401, according to preliminary tests. And when the police searched Ashley's belongings, they found detailed notes about the plan. She apparently kept them as leverage against Jason, in case he tried to back out. That was reckless, Sarah commented, her toxicologist's mind automatically analyzing the risk. Tex 401 is dangerous even in its diluted form, carrying the pure compound. She was always one for calculated risks, Richard said with a bitterness that suggested he was reevaluating many past interactions. Though perhaps not as calculated as she believed. He was silent for a moment, then continued with visible effort. I owe you an explanation about why they targeted tonight specifically. You mentioned overhearing something about a will. Sarah nodded hesitantly. They said tonight was their only opportunity before you changed your will. They were right. Richard's voice was steady, but Sarah could sense the pain beneath. I recently discovered Ashley's affair with Jason. I've spent the last few weeks quietly changing my estate plans to remove her as primary beneficiary. The changes were finalized yesterday, much earlier than expected. I had planned to confront her about the affair after our anniversary dinner. His laugh was devoid of humor. I suppose she had her own plans for the evening. I'm sorry, Sarah said softly, understanding the double betrayal he had suffered. Don't be. Your actions prevented a terrible outcome. He studied her with renewed interest. Steve told me you recognized the danger of the broken vial immediately and warned everyone away. That kind of quick thinking under pressure is rare. Sarah shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. My toxicology training, though I never imagined I'd be using it like this. Your background is impressive. Columbia nursing with toxicology specialization. That's a challenging program. May I ask why you're working as a housekeeper? The question was asked without judgment. Merely curiosity, Sarah found herself explaining about her father's illness, the astronomical costs of his treatment, and how the hotel's health insurance had been a lifeline. Richard listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about her father's condition and treatment. Neurodegenerative disorders are actually one of our research focuses, he noted. Our lab in Boston has been making significant progress on several fronts. Their conversation was interrupted by commotion at the suite's entrance. 2 officers were escorting Ashley toward the elevator, her hands cuffed behind her back. She walked with her head high, the picture of wounded dignity, until she spotted Richard and Sarah sitting together. You'll regret this, she called out, her composed facade cracking. Both of you? Richard didn't respond, but Sarah noticed the slight tightening of his jaw as he watched his wife being led away. Jason followed minutes later, his scientific arrogance replaced by shell-shocked disbelief as the reality of his situation set in. After they were gone, Brian Parker was next to be escorted out, though not in handcuffs. Detective Wilson approached Richard and Sarah as Parker left. We're taking Parker in for questioning, he explained. Preliminary investigation doesn't suggest he knew about the murder plot, but there's evidence he was feeding information about your schedule and security to Mrs. Thompson. Plus, he deliberately ignored Miss Miller's warning. I knew something was off about him, Sarah murmured. He seemed too invested in keeping me away from the Thompsons. He was on Ashley's family payroll before taking the hotel position, Steve added, joining the conversation. We found transactions dating back months. Apparently, she planted him here to monitor Mr. Thompson's activities and control access to him. Richard shook his head, the betrayal extending further than he had imagined. And to think I never questioned his hiring. The hotel manager mentioned he came highly recommended. By your wife's family, Steve confirmed grimly. Miguel appeared in the doorway, looking uncertain whether he was allowed to enter. When Detective Wilson waved him in, he approached hesitantly. I just wanted to check if you were okay, he said to Sarah, pointedly ignoring the prestigious company she was keeping. Things got pretty intense. I'm fine, Sarah assured him with a grateful smile. Thank you for speaking up about Parker. That was brave. Miguel shrugged. Not as brave as what you did. They're talking about you downstairs. The housekeeper who saved Richard Thompson. He grinned suddenly. Diane looks like she's about to have a stroke, trying to decide whether to fire you for causing a scene or promote you for saving a VIP. Richard chuckled, the sound surprisingly warm after the evening's events. I think I can help settle that dilemma. The Grand Plaza won't be firing Mrs. Miller. Not if they want to retain Thompson Pharmaceuticals' business. Miguel's eyes widened at the casual display of power. Right. Well, I should get back to my post. Glad you're okay, Sarah. After he left, Sarah turned to Richard with a frown. You don't need to do that. I don't expect special treatment. It's not special treatment to prevent unjust punishment, Richard replied. Though I hope you'll consider an alternative proposal. Before he could continue, Steve approached with a serious expression. Sir, the police need your statement now, and there are reporters gathering downstairs. We should move you to a secure location for the night. Richard nodded, rising reluctantly. Of course. He turned back to Sarah. We'll have to continue this conversation tomorrow. In the meantime, please accept my sincere gratitude. He extended his hand, which Sarah shook, noting the strength and warmth of his grip. My team will arrange transportation home for you and ensure you have legal representation for tomorrow's statements, should you need it, he added. That's not necessary, Sarah began. But Richard cut her off gently. Please, it's the least I can do. After he left with Steve, Sarah remained seated, trying to process the evening's events. The presidential suite, which had intimidated her that morning with its luxury and exclusivity, now seemed strangely hollow. A beautiful stage for ugly human dramas. Detective Wilson approached again, offering to escort her downstairs. There's a service elevator we can use to avoid the press, he explained. They're already running with the story. Billionaire's wife arrested in murder plot. By morning, they'll have your name too. Sarah felt a wave of dizziness at the thought. Her quiet, careful life was about to become very public. What happens now? She asked, echoing her earlier question to Richard, but this time with a different meaning. Detective Wilson considered her for a moment. Now, you go home, get some rest, and prepare for your 15 minutes of fame after that, he shrugged. Something tells me your life is about to change significantly. Miss Miller, people with your combination of intelligence, training, and moral courage tend to find themselves with unexpected opportunities. As Sarah rode the service elevator down to the staff area to collect her belongings, she thought about her father waiting at home, about the medical bills piling up on their kitchen table, and about the years of study and ambition she had set aside to care for him. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel something she had carefully suppressed, hope that perhaps her future might still hold some of the promise it once had. 3 weeks after the failed murder attempt, Sarah sat in the visitors' area of the Manhattan Detention Complex, nervously smoothing her simple dress. She wasn't entirely sure why she had accepted the request to visit Ashley Thompson, but something, curiosity perhaps, or a need for closure, had compelled her to come. When Ashley entered, Sarah barely recognized her. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup, replaced by a standard-issue jumpsuit and a face stripped of artifice. Yet even in prison attire, Ashley maintained a certain poise that spoke of her privileged upbringing. I didn't think you'd come, Ashley said as she sat across from Sarah. The reinforced glass between them a tangible reminder of their circumstances. Neither did I, Sarah admitted. Ashley studied her with calculating eyes. You've gotten a lot of attention since that night. The heroic housekeeper with the secret medical background who saved Richard Thompson. Her tone was mocking. But Sarah detected something else beneath it. Perhaps envy. That wasn't my intention, Sarah replied evenly. I just couldn't let him die. How noble. Ashley leaned forward slightly. Do you know why I asked you here? Sarah shook her head. Curiosity. I wanted to see the woman who destroyed everything I'd worked for. Ashley's perfect features hardened. Do you have any idea how long I planned? How carefully I positioned myself to secure my future? And then you, a nobody, ruined it all because you happened to be cleaning at the wrong moment. You tried to murder your husband, Sarah said quietly. I'd say you ruined things yourself. Ashley waved this away dismissively. It was business, not personal. Richard was going to throw away billions on strangers while leaving me with crumbs. What was I supposed to do? Not commit murder, Sarah suggested, incredulous at Ashley's rationalization. A flicker of genuine emotion, possibly remorse, crossed Ashley's face before her mask of cool indifference returned. You know what the irony is. If I'd just waited a few more months, filed for divorce like a good girl, I probably would have walked away with millions, enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Then why didn't you? Because it wouldn't have been enough, Ashley said simply. Not after I understood the true scope of his fortune, and because... She hesitated, a hint of vulnerability showing through. Because Jason and I had history. We had plans before Richard, before I understood what real wealth could be. Sarah felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for the woman across from her. Despite her heinous actions, Ashley had been raised to see relationships as transactions, wealth as the ultimate goal. In her distorted worldview, her actions had made a perverse kind of sense. The DA is offering me a deal, Ashley continued. 25 years if I testify against Jason. They think he was the mastermind because of his access to the drug. Was he? Ashley's laugh was hollow. Jason doesn't have the spine to mastermind anything. He was just a lovesick fool who never got over me. Her expression hardened again. But why should I protect him when he folded immediately, trying to pin everything on me? Sarah had no answer for that. After a moment of silence, she asked, "Is that why you wanted to see me? To tell me about your plea deal?" "No." Ashley leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I wanted to ask about Richard. The press says you two have gotten close." The insinuation in her tone made Sarah bristle. "Mr. Thompson offered me a job with his foundation and a scholarship to complete my medical education. That's all." It wasn't entirely all. Sarah had indeed been spending time with Richard, initially consulting on his foundation's new toxicology research initiative, then gradually in more personal settings. But whatever was developing between them was new and fragile, something Sarah was reluctant to define, especially to Ashley. "I see." Ashley's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe Sarah. "Well, a word of advice from someone who knows him intimately. Richard likes fixing broken things. Right now, you're his project, the struggling nurse who saved his life. But once you're fixed, he'll get bored." "I'm not broken," Sarah replied firmly. "And I'm not a project." Ashley shrugged elegantly, even in her prison uniform. "If you say so. But when it happens, remember I warned you." With that final barb, Ashley signaled to the guard that she was finished. As she rose to leave, she paused, something like genuine curiosity crossing her features. "One last thing. Why did you do it? Risk your job, your security, for a man you didn't even know?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Because it was the right thing to do, and because every life has value, regardless of bank account size." Ashley stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to decipher a particularly complex puzzle. "How exhausting it must be to live with such principles," she finally said, before turning to follow the guard back to her cell. "How was it?" Richard asked when Sarah met him for dinner that evening. He had been surprisingly supportive of her decision to visit Ashley, though he had declined to do so himself. "Strange," Sarah admitted, settling into her chair at the small Italian restaurant they both preferred for its privacy and excellent food. "She seems almost detached from what she did, like it was just a business decision gone wrong, not attempted murder." Richard nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "Ashley has always been remarkable at compartmentalizing. It's what made her such an effective social climber." He smiled ruefully. "And what made me miss all the warning signs." "It wasn't your fault," Sarah said gently, reaching across the table to briefly touch his hand. "She fooled everyone, including Jason, who'd known her for years." "Speaking of Jason," Richard said, clearly ready to change the subject. "The prosecutor called today. He's accepted a plea deal as well, 15 years with possibility of parole after 10, in exchange for full cooperation regarding the theft of TX-401 and testimony against Ashley." 15 years seems light for attempted murder, Sarah observed. "The prosecutor thinks a jury might be sympathetic to his claim that he was manipulated by Ashley. Plus, his testimony will help secure a longer sentence for her." Richard's expression was grim. "The silver lining is that this whole ordeal has exposed vulnerabilities in our lab security protocols. We're implementing sweeping changes to prevent anything like this from happening again." They fell into comfortable conversation about Richard's company and Sarah's studies. With his support, she had enrolled to complete her medical degree, focusing on toxicology and pharmacology. The scholarship he had established covered not only her tuition, but also provided for her father's care, freeing her to focus on her education full-time. "I visited my father after seeing Ashley," Sarah said as they shared a tiramisu. His new neurologist thinks he might be a good candidate for that clinical trial your Boston lab is running. Richard's eyes brightened. That's excellent news, Doctor. Abernathy is brilliant. If anyone can help your father, it's her team. I still can't believe how much has changed in just 3 weeks, Sarah mused. Sometimes I wake up thinking I need to get to the hotel for my shift. Do you miss it? Richard asked, genuinely curious. Sarah considered the question. Parts of it, I miss some of the people. Miguel still texts me updates on hotel gossip, but not the work itself, and definitely not the uniform. Richard smiled, his eyes warming as they often did when looking at her. I'm glad, though I have to admit, you made that uniform look remarkably dignified. Their eyes met, and Sarah felt the now familiar flutter in her chest. Whatever was growing between them was complicated by the circumstances of their meeting and the significant differences in their lives. Yet there was something undeniably genuine in their connection, an understanding and respect that transcended their backgrounds. Ashley had an interesting theory, Sarah said, deciding to address the elephant in the room. She seems to think I'm your project, the broken nurse you're trying to fix. Richard's expression turned serious. Is that what you think? No, Sarah replied honestly, but I do worry about the imbalance between us. You've given me so much, the scholarship, the position at your foundation, the specialized care for my father. Sarah, Richard interrupted gently, everything I've offered, you've more than earned. Your insights are already proving invaluable to our research team. The scholarship is an investment in talent that will benefit countless patients. As for your father's care, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Perhaps that's more personal, but it's something I wanted to do, not to create obligation, but because I understand what it means to watch someone you love suffer. The mention of his first wife, Elizabeth, hung unspoken between them. Sarah knew from both media coverage and Richard's occasional mentions that her death from cancer had profoundly shaped his life and the direction of his company. I know, she said softly, and I'm grateful. I just want to make sure that whatever is happening between us isn't influenced by gratitude on my part or rescue instincts on yours. Richard considered this, his expression thoughtful. Fair concerns. Perhaps we both need more time to be certain of our feelings, separate from the circumstances that brought us together. Sarah nodded, relieved by his understanding. I'd like that. So would I, Richard replied, his smile returning. In the meantime, we have plenty to focus on. Your studies, the Foundation's new initiatives, your father's treatment. The rest will sort itself out in time. As they left the restaurant, walking together through the cool spring evening, Sarah reflected on Ashley's warning. Perhaps Richard did have a tendency to fix broken things, but Sarah wasn't broken, just temporarily derailed. And unlike Ashley, whose interest in Richard had always been transactional, Sarah's growing feelings for him had nothing to do with what he could provide and everything to do with who he was. Time would tell if those feelings could develop into something lasting, but for now, the future looked brighter than it had in years, and that was enough. 5 years later, the autumn sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of the small chapel in Queen's Cemetery, casting colorful patterns across the polished wooden pews. Sarah Thompson stood at the simple granite headstone, placing a bouquet of white lilies beside it. The inscription read, Professor James Miller, 1950-2025, beloved father and teacher. His courage taught more than his words ever could. I miss you, Dad, Sarah whispered, touching the cool stone. But I know you'd be proud. Richard stood a respectful distance away, giving her a moment of privacy. When she finally turned toward him, he approached, taking her hand in his. He held on long enough to see you graduate, Richard said gently, and to walk you down the aisle. Sarah smiled through the tears that had gathered in her eyes. The extra 3 years the treatment gave him were a gift. Even with the progression of his disease, they were good years. Together, they walked slowly through the cemetery toward their waiting car. Sarah carried a leather portfolio under her arm, her father's copy of her recently published research on universal antidotes. The culmination of 5 years of intense work at what was now the Thompson-Miller Foundation. The board was impressed with your presentation yesterday, Richard said as they approached the car, particularly the application of TX401 derivatives as detection agents for a wide range of toxins. Sarah smiled at the irony. From murder weapon to life-saving tool, There's poetry in that transformation. There's poetry in many transformations, Richard replied, glancing at her with the same warmth that had grown steadily over their years together. Including yours, from housekeeper to Dr. Sarah Thompson, leading one of the most innovative toxicology research programs in the country. Our program, Sarah corrected. Your vision made it possible. The driver opened the car door, and as they settled into the back seat, Richard checked his watch. We should make it to the women's correctional facility by 2, if traffic cooperates. Sarah nodded, mentally preparing herself for what would be a challenging visit. The Thompson-Miller Foundation had recently received approval to implement a pilot healthcare program in the state prison system, focusing on preventative care and medical education for inmates. Their first site would be Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, where Ashley Thompson was serving her 25-year sentence. The facility's administrative office had been converted into a makeshift presentation space. Sarah stood before a small group of prison administrators and medical staff, outlining the foundation's proposal, while Richard observed from the back of the room. The program has 3 components, Sarah explained, her confidence evident in her steady voice and composed demeanor. First, improved access to preventative care for all inmates. Second, medical education opportunities for those interested in healthcare careers post-release. And third, participation in voluntary clinical trials for new treatments, with appropriate ethical safeguards and oversight. The prison's medical director nodded approvingly. This addresses several of our most pressing needs. When could implementation begin? As early as next month, Sarah replied. We've secured all necessary permissions and funding is already allocated. As the meeting concluded with handshakes and expressions of gratitude, the warden approached Sarah privately. Dr. Thompson, there's an inmate who's requested to speak with you. She's heard about the program and has particular interest. The warden hesitated. It's Ashley Thompson. Sarah exchanged a glance with Richard, who gave her a subtle nod, leaving the decision to her. I'll meet with her, Sarah decided after a moment's consideration. The women's common area had been cleared except for Ashley, who sat at a metal table, hands folded neatly before her. 5 years of incarceration had changed her physically. Her once perfect blonde hair now showed strands of gray, and the prison environment had leached some of the youthful softness from her face, yet she still carried herself with the same inherent elegance that had once charmed Manhattan's elite. Dr. Thompson, she greeted Sarah with a thin smile. Or should I say, Mrs. Thompson. Congratulations on both counts. Though considerably belated. Thank you, Sarah replied neutrally, taking a seat across from her. Ashley's gaze sharpened. I hear you're implementing a health program here, using Thompson Pharmaceuticals' resources to help inmates like me. There's irony for you. The foundation believes healthcare is a right, not a privilege, Sarah said simply. The Thompson-Miller Foundation, Ashley corrected, a hint of her old sharpness returning. I read about the name change. Richard must think very highly of you to add your name to his precious legacy. Sarah refused to be baited. The foundation's work speaks for itself. We've made significant advances in treatments for several conditions, including your former father-in-law's heart disease, and my former cellmate's breast cancer, Ashley added unexpectedly. She was part of your preliminary trial here last year. Complete remission now. A flicker of something like respect crossed her features. I hear you personally developed that protocol. It was a team effort, Sarah demurred. Ashley studied her for a long moment. You know, I've had a lot of time to think in here about choices, consequences. She glanced around the institutional space. About what true wealth really is. And what conclusions have you reached? That I was both very clever and incredibly stupid. Ashley's laugh held no humor. Clever enough to manipulate everyone around me. Too stupid to recognize what actually mattered. She leaned forward slightly. Do you know what I do here now? I work in the prison medical unit as an assistant. Turns out I have a knack for calming nervous patients. Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. That's good. It's something, Ashley corrected. A way to pass 20 more years. She tilted her head curiously. Why did you agree to see me today? Sarah considered the question carefully. Because I believe people can change, even those who've made terrible mistakes. How magnanimous of you, Ashley said. But the expected sarcasm didn't quite materialize. Instead, her voice held a note of genuine curiosity. You have everything I wanted now. Richard, his fortune, his name, his respect. Does that ever bother you? I never wanted your life, Ashley, Sarah replied honestly. I only couldn't allow you to take his, and your own. Every day I'm grateful I was in that hallway, not just for Richard and for the lives we've helped through the foundation, but for you too. Even here, you still have a chance to find purpose. Everyone deserves that opportunity. Something flickered across Ashley's perfect features, perhaps the closest thing to genuine emotion Sarah had ever seen from her. Such a clear moral compass. It must be exhausting, but the words lacked their former bite. As Sarah prepared to leave, Ashley added quietly, "When the program starts, I'd like to participate in the medical training portion, if that's allowed." Sarah nodded. "I'll make sure it is." The drive back to Manhattan was quiet, both Sarah and Richard absorbed in their thoughts. Finally, Richard broke the silence. "How was she?" "Different," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "Still Ashley, but there's something else there now. Maybe the beginning of reflection." Richard nodded, unsurprised. People can surprise you, given enough time and the right circumstances. Speaking of which, he pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "This came for you at the foundation office today." Sarah opened it to find a handwritten letter from Miguel Vega. Now, Dr. Miguel Vega, having graduated from medical school the previous spring, the young security guard who had backed up her story 5 years ago had been inspired by her example to pursue his own long-deferred dream of becoming a doctor. "He's accepted the fellowship position at our research center," Sarah said, smiling as she read. "Starting next month." "The circle completes itself," Richard observed, one act of courage continuing to ripple outward. As their car wound through the streets of Manhattan toward their home, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought her to this moment. A night shift change, an opened door, a conversation overheard. Such small, seemingly random occurrences that had altered so many lives forever. She thought of her father, whose dignity in illness had inspired the Foundation's focus on patient-centered care. Of Ashley, whose spectacular fall might yet lead to meaningful redemption. Of Jason, who, according to prison reports, was teaching science to fellow inmates while serving his sentence. Of Miguel, whose life had been transformed simply by witnessing courage in action. And of Richard, whose hand now held hers, whose strength and vision complemented her own, creating something greater than either could have achieved alone. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "How the most unexpected detours sometimes lead us exactly where we're meant to be," Sarah replied, thinking of all they had built together from the ashes of betrayal. "Not just the love we found, but the purpose we've created," as the sun set over the city. Bathing the skyline in golden light, Sarah found herself filled with a profound sense of gratitude for the mysterious workings of fate that had placed her in that hallway 5 years ago, for the courage to act when it mattered most, and for the knowledge that a single act of integrity could set in motion a cascade of transformation that continued to touch lives in ways she could never have imagined.